Imagine a room. Just, a completely ordinary empty room.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right. And you stand at the door, and you invite exactly 23 people to step inside.
23 people. Not exactly a huge crowd.
No, not at all. Now, I want you to ask yourself, what are the odds that 2 of those 23 people share the exact same birthday?
Well, human intuition always tells us the probability has to be minuscule, right?
Exactly.
Because we tend to just compare our own single birthday against the other 22 people in that room.
Right. You think about it for a second and say, okay, there are 365 days in a year. 23 is like a tiny fraction of that. So the odds have to be incredibly low.
Maybe 5%.
Yeah, or 10% if you're feeling really generous.
Mm-hmm.
But the math tells a completely different, almost unsettling story. With just 23 people, the odds of a shared birthday are exactly 50%.
It's a literal coin toss.
A literal coin toss. And if you bump that number up to just 70 people in the room, the odds hit 99.9%.
Which is wild.
It sounds like a magic trick, but it's just a quirk of probability.
Mm-hmm.
It happens because we aren't just checking your birthday against everyone else. We are checking every possible pair of people in that room against each other.
Right. The combinations scale up incredibly fast.
They really do. And here's where it gets really interesting. That simple, deeply counterintuitive mathematical logic. It's the exact same logic that ethical hackers and cybercriminals use to crack supposedly unbreakable digital locks.
Same locks protecting our bank accounts, our private messages, all of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Welcome to the invisible war of cryptography.
And it truly is a war fought entirely with mathematics. But the fascinating part is that the battle lines are drawn over principles that have existed long before computers were even a concept.
Oh, for sure.
Understanding how those mathematical rules are manipulated, it's absolutely essential for anyone looking to step into the world of network defense. You just cannot defend a system if you don't understand the invisible physics holding it together.
Which is exactly why we're here today. Whether you are an independent learner, maybe an early career IT professional trying to level up, or you're currently grinding through an academic program like Dr. Schuessler's Ethical Hacking and Cybersecurity Operations course, do yourself a huge favor right now.
Yes, take notes.
Take a second right now to like, subscribe, and share this deep dive. Do it so you never miss the insider tips that could, honestly, one day, save your network and save your career.
Because the landscape of cybersecurity shifts daily.
Yep.
What was totally impenetrable 5 years ago is vulnerable today.
Right. And don't forget to check the description below, too, because we've linked some incredibly valuable additional resources for you to explore.
You know, staying connected to the foundational mechanics of these concepts is really the only way you stay ahead of the curve in a modern corporate IT environment.
I couldn't agree more. So, let's set the stage for today's mission. This deep dive is the 12th in our 14-part series where we are unpacking the concepts from that phenomenal textbook, Hands-on Ethical Hacking and Network Defense, 4th edition.
Such a great text.
It really is. In our last deep dive on Chapter 11, we went on a wild ride through hacking wireless networks.
Oh, yeah. Rogue access points, the absolute fatal flaws in WEP, intercepting radio frequencies. It was chaos.
Total chaos. But today we are moving up the stack into Chapter 12, which is all about cryptography.
And this transition in the curriculum is incredibly deliberate. When you look at how academic programs, specifically those designed for modern MIS, CIS, and IT professionals, are structured, you see a bridge being built.
Right, it's not just theory.
Exactly. This material isn't about memorizing historical dates or abstract theorems. It is masterfully designed to take academic insight and immediately apply it to real-world, high-stakes tech demands.
Because modern tech environments demand professionals who know exactly how to protect data at rest and data in transit.
You are basically learning the anatomy of a lock so that you can become a master locksmith.
Okay, so let's unpack the anatomy of that lock.
Yeah.
Before we can understand how modern hackers shatter network security, we really have to look at what cryptography actually is at its core.
Right.
And the crazy thing is, this cat and mouse game of hiding information hasn't just been going on since microchips were invented. We're talking about a war that has been raging for millennia.
Quite literally millennia. The fundamental goal of cryptography is secure communication in the presence of an adversary. That's it.
Simple enough.
You have plaintext, which is readable, everyday language, and you want to convert it into ciphertext, which is unreadable and scrambled.
And decryption is just the process of converting that ciphertext back into plaintext.
Exactly. And people have been doing this forever. We see the encryption of selected Egyptian hieroglyphics thousands of years ago.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah. are ciphers used in the writing of the Book of Jeremiah, too, but the classic example, the one that really illustrates the mechanical concept of cryptography perfectly, is the Caesar cipher.
Right, developed by Julius Caesar to send military commands to his generals.
Yes, so the enemy couldn't intercept and understand the orders. The Caesar cipher is what we call a substitution cipher. The mechanism is incredibly straightforward.
How does it work?
You take the standard alphabet and you just shift each letter a specific number of positions down the line. In Caesar's implementation, he shifted it 3 positions.
Okay, so an A becomes a D.
Right, a B becomes an E, a C becomes an S, and so on.
So a substitution cipher is basically like those plastic secret decoder rings you used to get in a cereal box as a kid.
Yes, perfect analogy.
You just spin the inner ring 3 spaces to the left, and suddenly your secret message looks like total gibberish to your little brother who doesn't have the ring.
That is a highly accurate way to look at it. The physical rings themselves represent the algorithm and the instruction to shift 3 spaces. That's your secret key.
Got it. So if you have the algorithm but not the key, it takes a lot of work to read the message.
Right. But here is the critical part. Just as cryptography has existed for millennia, so has cryptanalysis.
Which is the study of breaking those codes, right?
Exactly. Because the Caesar cipher is actually terribly insecure once you know a little bit about human language.
Oh, I remember reading about this. Early cryptanalysts cracked these substitution ciphers using frequency analysis, right?
Yes, frequency analysis was the game changer.
They realized that in the English language, the letter E appears about 11% of the time. It's the most common letter.
Yep.
So if you intercept a scrambled message and you notice that the letter X appears 11% of the time in the ciphertext, it doesn't take a genius to guess that X actually stands for E.
Exactly. You don't even need the key at that point. You just use the statistical predictability of human speech against the math.
That's brilliant.
You're exploiting the inherent patterns of the plaintext that leak through the algorithm. So a strong algorithm in the modern era isn't necessarily one that is mathematically impossible to break.
Really? Then what makes it strong?
It's one where breaking it would require an impractical amount of time and computing resources. If an attacker has to run a supercomputer for 3 million years just to guess the key, the industry considers that practically secure.
Ah, that makes sense. And the history of pushing that boundary, of making codes harder and harder to break, gave us some of the most dramatic stories of the 20th century.
Absolutely. We have to talk about World War II.
Oh, the Enigma machine.
The German Enigma machine is arguably the most famous encryption device ever engineered. It looked like a heavy wooden typewriter, but the mechanics inside were just mind-bending.
It was invented by Arthur Scherbius, right? And it used a series of electromechanical rotors.
Yes. The Enigma was a masterpiece of dynamic substitution. Unlike the Caesar cipher, where an A is always a D, the Enigma changed its substitution alphabet with every single keystroke.
Wait, every single time you hit a key?
Every single time. When an operator pressed the letter A, an electrical current would flow through a plug board that swaps certain letters, then pass through 3 separate wired rotors that scramble the signal further.
That sounds incredibly complicated.
It was. The signal would hit a reflector, travel all the way back through the rotors, and light up a bulb indicating the ciphertext letter. And the moment that letter was typed, the first rotor would physically rotate 1 position.
Which means if you type the letter A a second time, the internal wiring had completely changed.
Exactly. The first A might become an L, but the second A might become a Q. It completely destroyed the frequency analysis trick we just talked about.
Wow. So the number of possible configurations had to be massive.
The key space was staggering for the 1940s. The operators had code books that told them exactly how to set the rotors and the plug board each morning.
So to read a message, you had to have an Enigma machine, and you had to know the exact starting settings for that specific day.
Right. But as perfect as it seemed, humans always find a flaw.
They always do.
The Enigma was broken through a massive, grueling, collaborative effort. Brilliant Polish cryptographers like Marian Rejewski laid the mathematical groundwork in the 1930s.
And then that intelligence was handed over to the British and American teams, right? Yeah. Bletchley Park.
Yes, led by people like Alan Turing. They didn't just guess the keys. They built an electromechanical machine called the bomb.
The bomb. And that was specifically designed to automate the process of logically eliminating incorrect settings.
Exactly. It eliminated bad settings based on known cribs pieces of plaintext they expected to find in the message, like daily weather reports. It was the dawn of mechanized cryptanalysis.
That is just incredible. And while Europe had Enigma, the Pacific Theater had its own cryptographic battles too.
Oh, absolutely. The Japanese utilized a highly complex electromechanical stepping switch system for diplomatic communications.
The Americans codenamed that one the Purple Machine, didn't they?
Yes, the Purple Machine. And it was broken by William Frederick Friedman, who is widely known as the father of U.S. cryptanalysis.
I read he built on the foundational techniques discovered by another pioneer, Herbert O. Yardley.
He did. It's wild to think that the outcomes of entire global conflicts hinged on mathematicians doing complex probability equations in hidden bunkers.
It really proves that the foundation of security is always mathematical.
It does. And briefly, to complete the historical picture before we move to modern networks, we should probably distinguish cryptography from steganography.
Oh, good point. Because they aren't the same thing.
Right. While cryptography scrambles a message to make it unreadable, steganography hides the very existence of the message in plain view.
Kind of like invisible ink.
Essentially, yes. In a modern digital context, you might take a perfectly normal high-resolution photograph of a landscape and slightly alter the color data of every 100th pixel to encode a secret text document.
Oh, wow. So to anyone looking at the image, it's just a picture of a mountain.
Exactly. The enemy doesn't try to decrypt it because they don't even know there is a secret to look for. Both have their places in covert operations, but cryptography is what secures our daily digital infrastructure.
Okay, but reviewing all this history brings up a massive question for me. Let's hear it. If Alan Turing and his team had the rudimentary electromechanical computing power to break the quote-unquote unbreakable Enigma back in the 1940s, how is it possible that our modern encryption isn't shattered daily?
It's a fair question.
Right. I mean, the smartphone sitting in my pocket right now is millions of times more powerful than the room-sized bomb machine. If the machines are so much faster, shouldn't breaking codes be trivial today?
That is the essential question of modern cryptography, and the answer relies entirely on a concept called the key space.
The key space?
Yes. Think of the key space as the absolute total universe of allowable values for a key. If you buy a cheap physical combination lock for your gym locker with 3 dials numbered 0 through 9, your key space is exactly 1,000 possible combinations.
Right, 000 to 999.
Exactly.
And if I lose my combination, I just sit there in the locker room and brute force it. I try 001, 002, and just spin the dials until it pops open. It would probably take me an hour.
Precisely. That's a brute force attack against a tiny key space. But modern encryption algorithms use digital key space sizes that are almost incomprehensible to the human mind.
Like how big are we talking?
They don't use 3 dials, they use binary bits. When we talk about a modern 256-bit encryption key, we are talking about 2 multiplied by itself 256 times.
Which is how many combinations exactly?
It is a number roughly equal to the estimated number of atoms in the observable universe.
Wait, really?
Yes, it's a 78-digit number. So, even if you took every supercomputer on the planet today, tied them all together, and had them checking billions of keys every single second, the sun would burn out and the solar system would collapse before they exhausted even a fraction of that key space.
That is mind-boggling.
Modern algorithms aren't hiding the data in a clever new way. They are hiding the key in a haystack the size of a galaxy. Computing power has grown exponentially, but the math of the key space has outpaced it by orders of magnitude.
Okay, so having established that a mathematically massive key space is the shield that protects our data, how do we actually apply this in a corporate network?
Right, because we have terabytes of data flowing through fiber optic cables every second.
Exactly. We need to lock it down instantly. And that brings us to the workhorses of the digital world symmetric algorithms.
The defining characteristic of a symmetric algorithm is elegance and simplicity. It uses the exact same single key to both encrypt the plaintext and decrypt the ciphertext.
So symmetric encryption is literally like having a single physical metal key to your front door.
Yep, perfect analogy.
It's quick, it's intuitive, and you use the exact same key to lock the deadbolt when you leave as you do to unlock it when you come home.
It is a perfect one-to-one relationship, and the operational advantages of symmetric algorithms in an IT environment are massive.
Because of speed, right?
Exactly. Because the math is relatively straightforward, mostly involving substituting and shifting bits around, they are incredibly fast. We're talking at least 1,000 times faster than the asymmetric alternatives we'll discuss later.
Oh, wow. 1,000 times faster.
At least. They require very little CPU processing overhead. If you need to encrypt an entire 4 terabyte database, or stream an encrypted 4K video over Netflix, you must use symmetric encryption. Anything else would bring the hardware to a grinding halt.
But there is a glaring, massive flaw in my front door key analogy.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
The system works perfectly if I'm the only person using the house. But what if I want my friend across the country to come visit and stay at my place?
You have to physically get that key into their hands?
Right. I could mail it, but someone could intercept the envelope, copy the key, and put it back. The lock is impenetrable, but the delivery mechanism is highly vulnerable. This is the distribution problem.
That is the absolute Achilles heel of symmetric cryptography. Key management at scale is a logistical nightmare.
I can imagine.
If two corporate servers on opposite sides of the world want to communicate securely using a symmetric key, how do they agree on what that key is without transmitting it over the internet?
Because if you send the key over an unencrypted channel, a hacker sniffing the network just copies it.
Exactly. If the attacker gets the key, the galaxy-sized key space doesn't matter. They just unlock the door.
And there's another issue, right? Symmetric algorithms don't support non-repudiation.
Correct. Non-repudiation is the ability to prove mathematically that a specific person sent a specific message. With a symmetric key, anyone who possesses the key can create a valid encrypted message.
So if a malicious employee gets a copy of the shared corporate key,
they could send a forged email to the finance department authorizing a wire transfer. When the system decrypts it, it assumes it's legitimate because the key worked. You know the message was encrypted, but you cannot prove exactly who encrypted it.
Anyone with a copy of the house key can open the door and leave a note on the kitchen counter. Okay, so despite the distribution flaw, the sheer speed makes them essential. How do these algorithms actually chew through the data? I know there are two main categories, stream ciphers and block ciphers.
Yes, and the distinction is crucial for network engineers. A stream cipher operates on the plaintext one single bit at a time.
One bit at a time. That sounds tedious.
It generates a continuous pseudo-random key stream of bits, and it mathematically mixes that key stream with the plaintext using an operation called XOR exclusive, or R.
Okay.
It's highly efficient for environments where data is flowing continuously in unpredictable sizes, like a live audio call.
And a block cipher takes a different approach.
A block cipher waits until it has a specific chunk of data, say a 64-bit or 128-bit block.
So it batches it up.
Exactly. Once the block is full, it locks it down and runs the entire block through complex mathematical functions of substitution and transposition all at once.
It just mangles the whole block.
It mangles the block, scrambles the pieces, substitutes values, and then spits out a heavily encrypted block of ciphertext. Block ciphers are generally considered more secure and are the standard for encrypting files and databases.
The history of how these symmetric standards evolved is honestly like a political thriller, especially when government intelligence agencies get involved. Let's look at DES, the Data Encryption Standard.
Right, going back to the 1970s.
Yeah, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, realized that the civilian and commercial worlds were about to become highly computerized. So they put out a public call for a standardized encryption method for unclassified data.
And IBM stepped up to the plate. They had a brilliant team of cryptographers who submitted an algorithm they called Lucifer.
Great name.
Lucifer was a block cipher that originally utilized a 128-bit key. It was robust and elegant. However, during the review process, the National Security Agency, the NSA, intervened.
Oh, here we go.
They reviewed the algorithm and made several modifications. Most notably, they reduced the actual key size from 128 bits down to 56 bits, with 8 bits used for error-checking parity.
Wow, that's a massive reduction.
This modified version was officially adopted as the Data Encryption Algorithm, or DEA, which became the DES standard.
And that NSA intervention sparked massive paranoia in the academic world. Cryptographers back then were furious.
They really were.
They suspected the NSA intentionally shortened the key size so that the NSA's own classified supercomputers would have the brute force power to break it, while civilian adversaries or foreign corporations wouldn't.
It was a huge conspiracy theory at the time. They also tweaked the internal substitution tables, the S-boxes, which made people suspect they installed a mathematical backdoor.
But the irony of that controversy is fascinating, right?
It is. Years later, a new cryptanalysis technique called differential cryptanalysis was published by the academic community. It was a highly advanced mathematical way to break block ciphers.
And when they applied it to DES,
they found something shocking. The NSA's mysterious tweaks to the S-boxes had actually fortified the algorithm perfectly against this attack.
So they didn't backdoor it?
No. The NSA knew about differential cryptanalysis a decade before the public did, and they altered DES to protect the civilian world from it.
That is incredible. They were playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers.
Exactly. But regardless of the S-boxes, the academics were right about one thing. The 56-bit key size was ultimately too small. Time and Moore's law eventually caught up with DES.
Because computing power roughly doubles every 2 years.
Right. By 1998, the Electronic Frontier Foundation wanted to prove a point about outdated encryption standards. They spent about $250,000 to custom build a machine specifically designed to crack DES.
And how long did it take?
It successfully brute forced a DES key in just 3 days.
3 days. Wow.
It was a massive wake-up call to the industry. DES was officially dead as a secure standard for sensitive data.
So the industry panicked and needed a quick fix, which gave us 3DES, or triple DES, and this is exactly what it sounds like.
They didn't invent a new math.
Right. They just took the original DES algorithm and ran the data through it 3 separate times using multiple keys. It definitely made the encryption much stronger, but from an IT operations standpoint, it was a heavy, clunky Band-Aid.
Running the data through the mangler 3 times took a massive toll on processing speed. 3DES was only ever meant to be a stopgap.
So how did we get to what we use today?
To find a true successor, NIST organized another open global competition. Cryptographers from all over the world submitted algorithms with names like Serpent, Two-Fish, and Rhindale.
Rhindale, I love that name.
After years of intense public scrutiny and cryptanalysis, NIST selected the algorithm created by 2 Belgian cryptographers, Joan Damon and Vincent Ryman, hence the name Rhindale.
And NIST officially rebranded Rhindale as the Advanced Encryption Standard, or AES.
Correct. AES is a symmetric block cipher that supports key sizes of 128 bits, 192 bits, and 256 bits.
So plenty of key space.
A massive key space. It won the competition not just because its math was virtually impenetrable, but because it was incredibly efficient. It could run fast on massive corporate servers, and it could run efficiently on tiny microchips with very little battery power.
That's why it's everywhere.
Today, AES 256 is the absolute global gold standard for symmetric encryption. If you look at your Wi-Fi router settings right now, you will see it using AES.
But we should also mention a few other players in the symmetric space, just so our listeners recognize the names if they pop up in a network audit.
Definitely. There is IDEA, the International Data Encryption Algorithm, which operates on 64-bit blocks with a 128-bit key. It's historically significant and was known for being free for non-commercial use.
And then there's Blowfish, created by the legendary cryptographer Bruce Schneier. That one is super flexible, allowing key lengths to scale all the way up to 448 bits.
And we absolutely must highlight the RC family, developed by Ronald L. Rivest. RC4 is a very famous stream cipher. It was incredibly fast and lightweight, which led to its widespread adoption.
However, it's perhaps most infamous today for being the underlying encryption in the original WEP wireless security standard.
Right, which we tore apart in the last deep dive. And the failure of WEP wasn't necessarily that RC4 was a bad algorithm in a vacuum, but how it was implemented.
Right. They reused the initialization vectors, the starting variables, way too frequently.
Hackers could just sit in a parking lot, collect enough packets to see those repeating variables, and mathematically deduce the key stream, cracking the network in minutes.
A perfect example of why implementation matters just as much as the algorithm itself.
Exactly. Rivest later developed RC5, which is a highly adaptable block cipher that can scale its key size up to a massive 2,048 bits, offering extreme security.
Okay, so we have built an arsenal of incredibly fast, highly complex, symmetric algorithms like AES. We can encrypt a database at lightning speed.
Yes, we can.
But we are still staring right at my house. Key problem. Handing someone the symmetric key across the hostile open internet is inherently dangerous.
It is the ultimate bottleneck.
If symmetric encryption has a fatal flaw in distribution, how is it that I can sit in a crowded coffee shop on public Wi-Fi, over my web browser, and securely log into my bank account without a hacker stealing my password?
You didn't physically drive to the bank to get a key, did you?
Exactly. I clearly didn't physically drive to the bank to get a symmetric key. So how do we solve the distribution crisis?
That crisis was solved by what is arguably the greatest mathematical breakthrough in the history of computer science: asymmetric algorithms, widely known as public key cryptography.
This concept completely flips the script.
It does. Instead of using a single shared key for both locking and unlocking, asymmetric algorithms generate a pair of keys that are deeply mathematically related to each other but uniquely distinct. One is designated as the public key, and the other is the private key.
This is where it gets absolutely brilliant. I'm going to build on the house key analogy and give you a visual for asymmetric encryption.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine I own a factory, and I manufacture hundreds of open, heavy-duty padlocks. I hand these open padlocks out to literally everyone I know. I leave them on park benches, I mail them to strangers, I post them on my public website.
So everyone has one?
Everyone. That padlock is my public key.
Right.
Anyone in the entire world can take one of my open padlocks, put it on a titanium strongbox containing a secret message intended for me, and snap it shut.
Okay, so the message is locked.
Exactly. But here is the magic of the math. Once that padlock clicks shut, it cannot be opened by another public padlock. It cannot even be opened by the person who just snapped it shut. The only thing in the entire universe that can unlock that padlock is the one single, unique, private key that I keep hidden securely in my pocket. I never share the private key. I never transmit it.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize a one-way mathematical trapdoor. Data encrypted with the public key can only be decrypted by the corresponding private key.
It completely solves the distribution problem.
It really does. If a bank wants to communicate securely with your web browser, the bank simply sends your browser its public key. Anyone sniffing the network can see the public key, but it doesn't matter.
Because your browser uses the bank's public key to lock a secret message,
Yeah.
sends it back, and even if a hacker intercepts it, they can't open it because they don't have the bank's hidden private key.
It's elegant. And the really crazy part is that the mechanism works in reverse as well, which solves our second major problem.
Proving identity.
Yes, it provides authentication and non-repudiation. Let's flip the padlock analogy. If you, the sender, encrypt a message using your highly guarded private key, you send it out into the world. Now, anyone can easily decrypt that message using your widely available public key.
Wait, if anyone can decrypt it, then the message isn't a secret anymore. Why would I do that?
Because you aren't trying to hide the message, you are trying to prove you wrote it.
Oh, I see.
Because only you possess the private key, the fact that your public key successfully decrypted the message is absolute, undeniable mathematical proof that you and only you could have created it.
You cannot repudiate or deny having sent it.
Exactly. A hacker cannot forge a message from you because they don't have the private key to lock it properly. This is the foundation of digital signatures.
It's an absolute game changer. It solves secure delivery, and it proves identity beyond a shadow of a doubt. But in cybersecurity, there is always a catch. What's the trade-off here?
The trade-off is extreme computational overhead.
It's slow.
Agonizingly slow. Asymmetric algorithms require incredibly complex CPU-intensive mathematics. Because of this complexity, they are so much slower compared to symmetric algorithms. You would never use asymmetric encryption to encrypt an entire hard drive. It would take weeks to process.
So let's look at the heavy hitters in the asymmetric space. The granddaddy of them all, the one that proved this concept could work commercially, is RSA.
Published in 1978, named after its creators, Ron Rivest, Adi Shamir, and Leonard Adelman.
And it is still heavily used today, especially in securing e-commerce transactions and within the TLS protocols that put the little padlock icon in our web browsers.
RSA security relies entirely on the mathematical concept of prime factorization. It uses a one-way function that is trivial to compute in one direction but practically impossible to reverse.
Let's break that down for listeners. What does prime factorization actually look like?
Think of it this way. If I give a computer two prime numbers, let's say 3 and 5, and ask it to multiply them, the computer instantly says 15.
Right. Very easy.
That is incredibly easy. But if I give a computer the number 15 and ask it to figure out which two prime numbers were multiplied together to create it, the computer has to do a little bit of work to figure out it was 3 and 5.
Okay, that makes sense.
Now scale that up. In RSA, we don't use 3 and 5. We use two prime numbers that are hundreds of digits long. Multiplying them together takes a computer a fraction of a millisecond to create a massive public key.
But if an attacker intercepts that massive public key
and tries to mathematically reverse engineer it to find the two original prime numbers, which form the private key, it is computationally impractical. It would take a cluster of modern supercomputers thousands of years to do the division.
That mathematical difficulty is the barrier protecting your data.
Exactly. Easy to go forward, practically impossible to go backward. Brilliant.
Then we have another major concept, Diffy-Hellman. Now, I want to clarify this right out of the gate because this trips up a lot of IT students.
Yes, let's clear this up.
Diffy-Hellman isn't actually an encryption algorithm that scrambles a document, is it?
That is a vital distinction. Do not let that confuse you on an exam or in the field. Diffy-Hellman does not encrypt data. It is a mathematical key agreement protocol.
Okay.
It solves a very specific problem. How do two parties who have never met, communicating over an entirely unsecured public network, mathematically arrive at a shared secret key without ever actually transmitting that key across the network?
Okay, here is the classic analogy for Diffy-Hellman. It's like two people, Alice and Bob, securely mixing paint over the internet.
I love this analogy.
They agree publicly to start with a common base color, say yellow. Everyone on the internet can see they're using yellow. Then Alice secretly picks her own private color, red.
Okay.
She mixes it with the yellow and gets orange. She sends that orange mixture over the internet to Bob. Meanwhile, Bob picks his own secret private color, blue. He mixes it with the public yellow and gets green. He sends the green mixture to Alice.
And here's where the math clicks together. Alice takes Bob's green mixture and adds her secret red to it. Bob takes Alice's orange mixture and adds his secret blue to it.
Because the underlying math is commutative, they both end up with the exact same final resulting color. Let's call it a muddy brown.
That muddy brown color is their new shared symmetric key.
But the critical part is the hacker sitting in the middle. The hacker saw the public yellow. They saw the orange go by, and they saw the green go by.
But because it is mathematically impossible to unmix paint to discover the secret red and blue, the hacker can never calculate the final muddy brown secret key. They established a shared key in broad daylight.
Exactly. The underlying math isn't colors, of course. It utilizes modulo arithmetic and discrete logarithms. But the principle is identical.
Another major player mentioned in the curriculum is ECC, or elliptic curve cryptography. While RSA uses prime factorization, ECC uses the algebraic structure of elliptic curves over finite fields.
Like a graph with a complex curve.
Imagine a graph with a complex curve and mathematically bouncing lines off that curve to generate points.
What's the advantage of doing curve math over prime number math?
Efficiency. ECC can provide the exact same level of cryptographic security as RSA, but with vastly smaller key sizes. A 256-bit ECC key offers roughly the same security as a massive 3072-bit RSA key.
It's a huge difference.
Because the keys are smaller, the math is faster, and it requires far less memory, disk space, and bandwidth. This makes ECC the absolute gold standard for environments with limited resources, cell phones, IoT smart home devices, and wireless sensors.
And finally, there is ELGAMAL, which also uses complex discrete logarithm problems, another type of math that takes years of CPU-intensive operations to solve.
Right.
So looking at the big picture, we have a dilemma. Where does the systems architect actually deploy? Do we use the incredibly fast symmetric keys, or do we use the highly secure, distribution-friendly asymmetric keys?
You use both. You build a hybrid system.
Ah, of course.
This is the core insight for career IT professionals bridging academic theory into operational practice. Real-world systems almost never use just one or the other. Look at the HTTPS connection you are using to stream this deep dive right now.
What's happening under the hood?
Your browser uses slow, secure, asymmetric algorithms like RSA or ECC to securely negotiate a connection with the server and safely agree on a temporary, session-specific symmetric key.
Like using the padlock just to send the house key.
Precisely. Once that temporary symmetric key is securely established, the browser and the server drop the heavy asymmetric math. They switch over to a blazingly fast symmetric algorithm, like AES, to handle the heavy lifting of encrypting the actual video stream data.
So you get the foolproof key distribution of asymmetric cryptography combined with the raw speed of symmetric cryptography. This is the best of both worlds.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. We solved the speed issue. We solved the delivery issue. We can hide the contents of a message flawlessly. But as we move forward, we encounter a new, terrifying problem.
The integrity problem.
Right. Because here's the thing. What if an attacker realizes they can't read the message, so they decide to just destroy it? Let's say I'm an executive sending a highly sensitive encrypted email to my bank, instructing them to transfer $1,000.
Okay.
An attacker intercepts it. They can't read it, but they decide to just randomly scramble a few bytes of the ciphertext before passing it along. When the bank decrypts it, the message is corrupted. Instead of transfer 1,000, it now reads transfer 9,000.
That's a huge problem.
How do we mathematically prove that a file or a message hasn't been tampered with while in transit?
You've just identified the shift from the concept of confidentiality hiding data to the concept of integrity protecting data from alteration. And the cryptographic tool we use to guarantee data integrity is called hashing.
Hashing.
A hashing algorithm takes an input of any variable length. It could be a single two-letter word, or it could be a 50-gigabyte database file. It runs that input through a complex one-way mathematical formula and produces a fixed-length output, which we call a hash value or a message digest.
Okay, here is the best analogy for hashing.
Yeah.
It is exactly like an industrial meat grinder.
A meat grinder. I like it.
You can put an entire chicken into the grinder, turn the crank, and out comes exactly 1 pound of ground meat. You can put a massive steak into the grinder, turn the crank, and out comes exactly 1 pound of ground meat.
Okay.
You can even drop a single peanut into the grinder, and out comes exactly 1 pound of ground peanut paste. The output size is always fixed, no matter how big the input was.
And the most important characteristic of that meat grinder, it is a strictly one-way function. You can never take the pound of ground meat, put it back through the grinder in reverse, and get the whole chicken back.
Exactly. You cannot reverse engineer a hash value to recreate the original file.
So it acts as a digital fingerprint for a file. If I run a contract through a hashing algorithm and get a specific fingerprint, and then a hacker alters even a single comma in that contract, the resulting hash fingerprint will be wildly, completely different.
It's a tamper-evident seal.
Exactly. And just like human fingerprints, the goal is absolute uniqueness. Every unique file should produce a completely unique hash. However, because we are dealing with finite mathematics, we run into an issue known as the pigeonhole principle.
Explain that.
If you have 10 pigeons, but only 9 holes for them to sleep in, math dictates that at least 2 pigeons are going to have to share a hole.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because the input to a hash function can be infinitely long, but the output digest is a strict fixed size, say 256 bits, there is a limited number of possible hash values. Therefore, mathematical theory dictates that eventually 2 completely different input files must produce the exact same hash output.
When that happens, it is called a collision.
And a collision is catastrophic for security, because if a malicious hacker can find a virus file that accidentally produces the exact same hash fingerprint as a legitimate Microsoft system update, the computer will look at the fingerprint, think it's a legitimate update, and install the virus.
It is the ultimate forgery. A strong hashing algorithm is one where finding a collision is so mathematically improbable that it is practically impossible.
But the graveyard of old hashing algorithms is filled with systems where collisions became too easy to manufacture. For example, the MD family of hashes developed by Ron Rivest.
We had MD2, MD4, and eventually MD5. For a long time in the early 2000s, MD5 was the absolute industry standard for verifying files.
It's wild to look back at the history. Back in 1994, cryptographers estimated it would cost a massive state-sponsored lab $10 million to build a machine capable of finding an MD5 collision via brute force.
The technology moves fast.
Very fast. Today, a college student with a decent gaming PC can find an MD5 collision in a matter of hours. The algorithm is structurally weak by modern standards.
Wow, hours.
In fact, in 2012, one of the most sophisticated pieces of malware ever discovered, known as the Flame virus, was able to infect highly secure Middle Eastern energy facilities precisely because its creators managed to mathematically force an MD5 collision to forge a Microsoft digital certificate.
Which is why any modern IT professional knows that MD5 is considered cryptographically broken for security purposes. The industry largely abandoned it and moved to the secure hash algorithm, or SHA family, developed by the NSA and published by NIST.
SHA-1 was the immediate successor, producing a 160-bit digest. But cryptanalysts eventually proved that collision attacks against SHA-1 were also mathematically feasible,
leading major tech companies like Google to formally deprecate it.
Today, modern corporate systems use the SHA-2 family, which utilizes much longer digests, like SHA-256 and SHA-512. The larger output means astronomically more pigeonholes, making collisions incredibly hard to find.
And looking to the future, NIST has already hosted a competition and selected the KICAC algorithm to serve as the new SHA-3 standard.
Right. It operates on an entirely different internal architectural structure called a sponge construction, designed to provide future-proof security if SHA-2 ever falls.
So we have this perfect digital fingerprint. This brings us to an incredibly powerful application, digital signatures. We talked about non-repudiation earlier with asymmetric keys.
Yes.
A digital signature is where hashing and asymmetric cryptography combine to form an airtight legal and technical guarantee.
Here's how the workflow operates. If an executive wants to digitally sign a sensitive contract, they don't just encrypt the whole document. First, their software runs the plaintext contract through a hashing algorithm like SHA-256 to generate a unique fingerprint.
Okay, so they have the fingerprint.
Then, the software encrypts just that tiny hash fingerprint using the executive's highly secure private key. That encrypted hash is the digital signature.
And then they email both the unencrypted contract and the digital signature to the recipient.
Exactly. When the recipient gets the email, their software performs two actions. First, it hashes the unencrypted contract itself to get a fresh fingerprint. Second, it uses the executive's widely available public key to decrypt the signature attached to the email.
If the newly calculated fingerprint matches the decrypted signature perfectly, it proves two massive things. First, it proves the document hasn't been altered by even a single comma in transit because the hashes match. Integrity is guaranteed.
Exactly.
Second, because only the executive's public key could successfully decrypt the signature, it proves that only the executive's private key could have locked it in the first place. Authenticity and non-repudiation are guaranteed.
This precise logic is the backbone of secure corporate email, and the history here is legendary. We have to talk about PGP. Pretty good privacy.
Oh, this is a great story.
PGP was created by a software engineer named Phil Zimmerman back in the early 1990s. He basically bundled RSA encryption and digital signatures into a piece of software that average people could actually use on their personal computers.
And he released it for free on the early internet,
which resulted in one of the most absurd legal battles in tech history. By releasing PGP globally, Zimmerman effectively handed military-grade encryption to the general public.
And the United States government reacted by launching a multi-year federal criminal investigation into him.
Yeah.
At the time, strong encryption algorithms were legally classified under U.S. export regulations as munitions, right alongside Tomahawk missiles and artillery shells.
It's hard to believe, but yes.
The government literally tried to argue he was an international arms trafficker for uploading math to a bulletin board.
It's a stark reminder of how deeply governments understand the disruptive power of strong cryptography. They knew that if civilians had unbreakable codes, intelligence agencies would go blind.
But Zimmerman fought back, right?
He famously fought back by exploiting the First Amendment. He printed the entire source code of PGP in a physical hardcover book, complete with page numbers. Because books are protected by freedom of speech, anyone could legally buy the book, take it out of the country, scan the pages, and compile the software, entirely bypassing the munitions export laws.
A brilliant hack of the legal system. Today, thankfully, those specific export laws have been relaxed, and the Internet standard derived from his work, known as OpenPGP, is widely used globally.
There is also SMAME, the Secure Multipurpose Internet Mail extension, which does the exact same thing but is built directly into enterprise email clients like Microsoft Outlook. It handles the certificate exchange seamlessly in the background so employees don't have to manually deal with keys.
But let me ask you a very practical question to ground this for the students and early career pros listening.
Sure, go ahead.
If hashing is a strictly one-way street, meaning I can run a file through SHA-256 to get a hash, but I can never mathematically reverse that hash to read the original file, what is the actual day-to-day use case for this, for a sysadmin? If I can't read the hash, why do I care?
That is a critical operational question. The primary use case for hashing in an enterprise environment isn't to read the data. It is to verify the integrity of data at rest and data in transit.
Okay, give me an example.
Think about deploying a massive, critical software update across your entire fleet of corporate servers. Advanced persistent threat groups, state-sponsored hackers, often compromise software vendors' download servers. They replaced the legitimate software update with a nearly identical version embedded with a backdoor.
A supply chain attack.
Exactly. But the legitimate software vendor will calculate the official SHA-256 hash of their clean file and publish that hash text securely on their main website.
So when your systems download the update,
your automated deployment tools will hash the downloaded file before executing it. If your calculated hash matches the vendor's published hash perfectly, you have mathematical certainty the file is pristine. If it differs even slightly, your systems immediately flag it as corrupted or compromised and halt the installation.
That is huge for security.
And even more importantly for daily operations, hashing is how modern systems securely store user passwords, which we will dive into deeply when we look at password cracking methodology.
Okay, so we've built this incredible interlocking ecosystem of symmetric speed, asymmetric keys, and hashing signatures.
It's quite the setup.
But as an IT professional reviewing this architecture, I keep coming back to a glaring vulnerability in the foundational trust model. Because if digital signatures rely entirely on public keys to verify identity, how do I actually know that the public key sitting on a server labeled Bank of America really belongs to Bank of America?
Right, that's the million-dollar question.
What if a teenager in a basement just generated a key pair on his laptop, named the public key Bank of America, and tricked my browser into downloading it?
You've hit on the fundamental challenge of digital trust. Cryptography provides the mathematical mechanisms to lock the doors, but mathematics alone cannot verify real-world identity. We need an overarching architecture to manage that trust.
And that architecture is public key infrastructure, or PKI.
Exactly. PKI is not a single algorithm. It is a comprehensive, sprawling collection of hardware, software, policies, legal agreements, and procedures needed to manage, create, distribute, and revoke digital certificates.
And the digital certificate is the solution to my fake bank problem. A certificate, which follows a strict, globally recognized formatting standard known as X.509, is a digital document that uses digital signatures to mathematically bind a specific public key to a specific organization's verified real-world identity.
But the crucial part isn't the certificate itself, it's who issues it.
Right. Certificates are issued by a trusted third-party entity known as a certification authority, or CA. Think of a CA like the digital equivalent of a government passport office.
I like that.
If a stranger on the street hands you a piece of paper they wrote in crayon saying, "I am John Smith," you don't trust it. But if they hand you a government-issued passport, you trust it. You don't necessarily know John Smith, but you trust the government agency that verified his birth certificate and stamped the passport.
So in the digital world, my operating system, Windows, Mac OS, and my web browsers come pre-programmed by Microsoft and Apple with a literal folder containing the root certificates of a few dozen highly secure, heavily audited CAs, companies like DigiCert or GlobalSign.
When Bank of America wants a certificate for their website, they can't just make one. They have to apply to DigiCert.
They have to prove their legal corporate identity, prove they own the domain name, and undergo verification. Once satisfied, DigiCert digitally signs the bank's certificate using DigiCert's own highly protected private key.
This creates a chain of trust. Your browser inherently trusts DigiCert. DigiCert mathematically vouches for the bank's public key. Therefore, your browser trusts the bank's public key.
If the math checks out, you get the secure padlock icon. If a teenager in a basement tries to present a fake bank certificate, it won't have DigiCert's cryptographically valid signature on it, and your browser will immediately throw a massive red warning screen.
But managing this ecosystem isn't a set-it-and-forget-it situation. Certificates are highly volatile. They have a very strict life cycle that network administrators must manage.
They absolutely do, and managing this life cycle is a massive, high-stress part of a cybersecurity professional's job. Certificates have hard, non-negotiable expiration dates, typically restricted to 1 year or less now.
This limits the window of opportunity if an underlying private key is ever silently compromised.
Before it expires, an administrator must navigate a strict renewal process. But sometimes disaster strikes and a certificate needs to be forcefully invalidated before its expiration date. This is called revocation.
Why would you need to revoke a certificate? Managing that life cycle is a nightmare. I remember a few years ago when a major global tech giant simply forgot to renew a single root certificate, and it took down their entire global app ecosystem and cellular network for an entire day. It's not just about hackers, it's about operational failure.
Exactly. Operational failures are common. If a server physically burns down and the hard drives are unrecoverable, you must revoke the certificate because you don't know who might scavenge the drive.
Oh, that makes sense.
If an administrator accidentally commits a private key to a public GitHub repository, which happens shockingly often, that key is burned. Or in a worst-case scenario, the CA itself is compromised.
Like the DigiNotar hack in 2011, a Dutch certificate authority was fully breached by hackers, and the hackers used the CA systems to issue completely valid, cryptographically perfect certificates for Google.com to themselves.
It was devastating.
They used those certificates to intercept the Gmail traffic of hundreds of thousands of Iranian citizens. It was a catastrophic failure of the trust model.
Which is why revocation mechanisms are vital. When a certificate is compromised, the CA immediately places its unique serial number on a certificate revocation list, or CRL.
And modern browsers also use a faster protocol called OCSP Online Certificate Status Protocol to check the real-time status of a certificate. If the browser sees the serial number on the bad list, it terminates the connection instantly.
And to forcefully enforce this secure ecosystem, administrators implement a standard called HSTS, HTTP Strict Transport Security. Created in 2012, this is a mechanism where a web server explicitly tells a web browser, you are only allowed to communicate with me over a secure, encrypted HTTPS channel. Do not even attempt an unencrypted connection.
It actively forces a secure channel, and crucially, it tells the browser to completely block the user from accessing the site if the server certificate cannot be validated. It removes the user's ability to just click the ignore warning and proceed anyway button.
It protects users from their own bad decisions and protects the network from downgrade attacks. Now, while major public websites rely on large third-party CAs to establish trust with the general internet, the curriculum explicitly notes how IT professionals must configure internal PKI infrastructure.
For example, using Microsoft Windows Server and Active Directory certificate services, an enterprise can spin up its own internal root CA.
Exactly.
I have to challenge that a bit, based on what we just discussed about the administrative burden. Setting up a whole internal CA, managing the hardware, securing the root keys in an offline vault, constantly dealing with the lifecycle software, that sounds like a massive, expensive IT headache. Why wouldn't a company just outsource this entirely to VeriSign or Let's Encrypt and let them handle the hassle?
If you're managing a corporate network right now, you have to think about deployment costs and absolute control. Yes, your public-facing e-commerce site absolutely needs a commercial third-party CA so that regular internet users' browsers trust it. But look inside your corporate network.
Okay, looking inside.
You might have 10,000 employee laptops, 50,000 internal IoT devices, hundreds of internal intranet servers, and VPN gateways. Paying a commercial CA for every single one of those internal certificates would be astronomically expensive and slow.
Okay, the scale makes it prohibitive.
Exactly. By spinning up Active Directory certificate services, you are acting as your own digital passport agency. Because it integrates deeply with your Active Directory, you can automatically auto-enroll and issue certificates to every single corporate laptop the moment it joins the domain at zero marginal cost.
That's incredibly powerful.
This allows you to enforce strict mutual authentication on your internal network. You configure your Wi-Fi and VPN so that only devices possessing a valid internal certificate can connect. Even if an attacker steals an employee's password, they can't log in from their personal laptop because it lacks the internal certificate. It is the absolute backbone of modern zero-trust architecture.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Control the borders, both external and internal. So we've spent the first half of this deep dive building a magnificent, mathematically flawless fortress.
A very strong fortress.
We have symmetric speed for the heavy lifting, asymmetric trust for secure delivery, hashing fingerprints for absolute integrity, and PKI verifying identities. It seems impenetrable. Now we flip the script. Welcome to the invisible war. How do ethical hackers and malicious threat actors actually go about breaking this fortress?
The first critical distinction we have to make is between passive and active cryptographic attacks. A passive attack is essentially silent eavesdropping.
Silent eavesdropping.
The attacker is sitting on the network, sniffing packets, and collecting gigabytes of the encrypted ciphertext as it flows by. They aren't altering the data, they are just hoarding it, taking it back to their lab and analyzing it offline, hoping to find a mathematical weakness or waiting for computers to get fast enough to crack it.
Collect now, decrypt later.
Precisely. An active attack, however, is much more aggressive and interactive. The attacker is actively sending modified input, altered ciphertext, or malformed queries to the crypto system, trying to trick the server into revealing the secret key or spitting out the plaintext in an error message.
And this brings us right back to the hook we opened the show with, the birthday attack.
Yes.
We talked about how 23 people in a room gives a 50% chance of a shared birthday because we are comparing pairs. How does a hacker weaponize that mathematical quirk against cryptography?
They use it to devastate hashing algorithms. Remember, we want our hash functions to be collision resistant so attackers can't forge digital signatures. A hacker doesn't always need to mathematically reverse a hash to break a system. Sometimes they just need to find any two files, one legitimate, one malicious, that produce the exact same hash fingerprint.
And because of the birthday paradox math.
The number of brute force attempts required to find a collision between any two random inputs is vastly, exponentially smaller than the size of the key space would suggest. If a hash function produces a 64-bit output, you don't need to try 2 to the 64th power combinations. The birthday math means you only need to try roughly 2 to the 32nd power combinations to find a collision.
It drastically lowers the bar for an attacker to swap a safe file with malware and bypass the integrity checks.
That is terrifyingly clever, using the laws of probability against the algorithm. And the sources also list several highly technical mathematical attacks where the attacker analyzes the mathematical properties of the cipher itself.
Yes, these are the classic Crypt-Analytic attacks. There is the ciphertext-only attack, which is the hardest. The hacker only has a giant pile of encrypted data and must use advanced statistical analysis like frequency analysis of recurring binary blocks to deduce the key.
Then there is the known plaintext attack. This is where the attacker has managed to obtain a copy of the encrypted message AD, a copy of the unencrypted original. By comparing the two, they can often reverse engineer the mathematical relationship and extract the key, which they can then use to decrypt all other messages sent with that key.
Bletchley Park used known plaintext attacks heavily against Enigma by guessing the daily weather report.
Yes, exactly.
Then it goes even further. There is the chosen plaintext attack, where the attacker literally tricks the target system into encrypting a specific message of the attacker's choosing. By controlling the input and observing the output, they can map the internal workings of the algorithm.
And then we get to the really exotic methods, side channel attacks. These are fascinating because the attacker completely ignores the mathematics. The math might be flawless AES 256. Instead, the attacker attacks the physical hardware executing the math.
How does that work?
Every cryptographic operation takes physical energy. A side channel attack measures the physical environment of the server. They might measure the exact microsecond timing of how long the CPU takes to process different inputs.
Or use an oscilloscope to measure microscopic fluctuations in the server's power consumption.
There is even acoustic cryptanalysis, where highly sophisticated attackers use sensitive microphones to listen to the high-pitched microscopic whine of the capacitors on the motherboard.
Wait, really?
Yes. Because different mathematical operations require slightly different amounts of power and time, an attacker can literally listen to the server thinking and mathematically deduce the private key just by mapping the power draw or the sound.
That is literal spy movie stuff. Van Ack freaking, reading the radiation off a monitor. It proves that security doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in physical space.
Exactly.
But often, attackers don't even bother with the heavy math or the exotic microphones. They realize the lock is too strong, so they just walk around the wall. They bypass the cryptography entirely at the network level. Let's talk about the man-in-the-middle attack.
In a man-in-the-middle, or MIT-M attack, the adversary positions themselves logically between the victim's computer and the intended destination, like a secure banking server. Imagine you're sitting in an airport using the public Wi-Fi. The attacker intercepts your connection.
So to you, the attacker pretends to be the bank's server.
And to the bank, the attacker pretends to be your laptop. They intercept your traffic, decrypt it using a fake certificate they supplied to you, read your passwords, re-encrypt it using the bank's real certificate, and pass it along. Neither you nor the bank realizes there is a silent third party sitting in the middle of your supposedly secure connection reading everything.
And one of the most effective ways attackers establish that mid-M position is through an SSL-TLS downgrade attack. This is insidious.
Very insidious.
Here's my analogy for how a downgrade attack functions. Imagine a highly secure bank vault. The bank manager installs a state-of-the-art, impenetrable titanium electronic lock. An attacker walks up, intercepts the bank manager right before they lock up for the night, and smooth talks them.
Okay.
The attacker convinces the manager that the electronic lock is glitching and might trap them inside tomorrow. The attacker suggests, hey, just for tonight, why don't you use this cheap $5 luggage padlock instead? The manager agrees, secures the vault with a cheap padlock, and goes home. The attacker then simply walks up and picks the padlock with a paperclip.
That is exactly the mechanism of a downgrade attack. When your web browser initially connects to a secure server, there is a negotiation phase called the TLS handshake. The client and server compare notes to see which cryptographic algorithms they both support to find the strongest mutual options.
If an attacker intercepts that initial unencrypted handshake, they manipulate the messages.
They tell the server, hey, this user is on a really old, outdated browser and only supports the weakest, oldest cipher you have on file maybe export grade 40-bit RC4. The vulnerable server says, okay, we'll use the weak cipher so they can connect. The attacker then easily breaks that weak cipher on the fly.
This was made famous by security researcher Moxie Marlinspike when he released a tool called SSL Strip, which completely automated this process, forcing browsers to drop secure HTTPS connections and use plain unencrypted HTTP.
The defense against this is for network administrators to strictly configure their servers to outright refuse connections that attempt to negotiate weak, deprecated ciphers. If it's not TLS 1.2 or higher, drop the connection.
Exactly. Don't even keep the cheap padlock in the building. The curriculum also details replay attacks. This is where an attacker passively captures a legitimate encrypted packet of data. For instance, the encrypted authentication token your computer sends to the server to prove you successfully entered your password.
The attacker might not be able to decrypt the token, but they don't need to. They just save a copy of it to their hard drive. An hour later, after you've logged off, the attacker resubmits or replays that exact same captured token to the server. If the server isn't configured properly, it sees the cryptographically valid token and grants the attacker full authenticated access to your account.
Which is why modern authentication systems like Kerberos implement strict timestamping, sequence numbers, or single-use random nonces. The server looks at the replayed token and says, yes, the math is valid, but the timestamp is an hour old, and I've already seen the sequence number. Access denied.
Exactly. You build defenses against the behavior, not just the math.
So we see that attackers are getting creative. They're attacking the network protocols and the hardware. But there is one vulnerability that is older than computers themselves, and it remains the single largest, most catastrophic attack vector in the cybersecurity landscape today.
The human element.
We are moving to the final piece of the puzzle, the human weakness, specifically password cracking.
Let's establish a hard legal and ethical boundary first, as the curriculum explicitly mandates for all students and professionals. In the United States and in most jurisdictions globally, intentionally cracking someone else's password or attempting to access a system you do not own without explicit written authorization is a federal crime, period.
Got to be careful with that.
Ethical hackers, penetration testers only execute these attacks within strictly defined, legally binding scopes of engagement where they have written permission from the corporation to test their defenses. The only time it is generally legal to crack a password without permission is if you are cracking your own forgotten password on your own localized hardware.
With the legal disclaimer firmly stated, let's look at the methodology. Because the reality is the math behind AES 256 or RSA is just too strong for hackers to bother breaking. So attackers don't target the algorithm, they target the weak, predictable humans using the system.
Right, and the first step in password cracking isn't sitting at a login screen guessing passwords like in the movies. The system will lock you out after 3 tries. The real attack happens offline by stealing the system's password hash file.
Correct. When you create an account on a modern system, the server absolutely does not store your plaintext password in its database. If it did, a single database breach would compromise millions of user accounts instantly. Instead, the server takes your plaintext password, runs it through a hashing algorithm like SHA-256, and stores only the resulting hash fingerprint.
When you log in the next day, the system hashes what you typed in the box and compares it to the stored hash. If the hashes match, you are authenticated.
So to crack passwords efficiently, an attacker must first exploit some other vulnerability, like a SQL injection or a server misconfiguration, to exfiltrate that hash file. On Unix and Linux systems, this is typically the /etc/shadow file, where you'll often see hashes starting with $6 indicating SHA-512. On Windows systems, it is the Security Accounts Manager, or SAM, file.
Once the attacker has successfully downloaded that file locally onto their own high-powered hacking rig, the race is on. They can guess as fast as their hardware allows without worrying about the server locking them out. And there are 2 main attack methodologies. The first is brute force. This is the mathematical certainty approach. The program systematically tries literally every possible combination of characters in the key space. A, then B, then C, all the way through every letter, number, and symbol up to massive string lengths. It guarantees you will eventually find the password.
But the downside is time. A complex, random 15-character password might take centuries to brute force. Hackers don't have centuries.
Which is why attackers vastly prefer the second method, the dictionary attack. This attack leverages human psychology. Humans are inherently terrible at creating mathematically random passwords because we have to remember them. So we use words. We use the word password. We use our dog's name, our favorite sports teams, or pop culture references.
A dictionary attack uses massive, multi-gigabyte text files containing millions of known dictionary words, slang, and crucially, billions of leaked passwords from previous massive data breaches.
Right, because if someone used Hunter2 or Admin123 on a compromised gaming forum 10 years ago, they're probably still using it for their corporate email today. The cracking program simply hashes every single word in that massive dictionary file and compares it to the stolen database hashes. It is exponentially faster than a brute force attack because it completely ignores the random gibberish and only guesses the patterns humans are actually likely to type.
But hackers are inherently impatient, and hashing millions of words for every new database they steal still takes time. So they built acceleration techniques. The most prominent historical acceleration method is the rainbow table. A rainbow table is a massive, multi-terabyte, pre-calculated lookup database.
Instead of hashing the dictionary words on the fly during the attack, hackers spend months using supercomputers to pre-calculate the hash values for billions of possible passwords, and they store the results. When they steal your database's hash file, they don't do any math. They just do a simple, lightning-fast database search query. If your hash is in their table, the table instantly reveals the plaintext password.
And to generate these massive tables, or to run brute force attacks faster, attackers made a major hardware shift. They moved away from standard computer processors, CPUs, and moved to using massive rigs of GPUs, graphics processing units, the video cards used for high-end gaming.
The architectural difference between a CPU and a GPU is what makes this so devastating. Think of a CPU like a small team of highly educated executives. There are only 4 or 8 of them, the cores, but they can handle incredibly complex, convoluted logic and multitasking. A GPU, on the other hand, is designed to render millions of individual pixels on a monitor simultaneously. Think of a GPU like an army of 10,000 high school students who only know how to do very basic arithmetic.
Hashing is just basic arithmetic done over and over again.
Exactly. So while a CPU might calculate a few thousand hashes per second, a modern array of GPUs can calculate hundreds of billions of hashes per second by running the math in massive parallel across thousands of cores.
Okay, so if the attackers have pre-calculated terabyte rainbow tables and massive GPU server farms chewing through billions of guesses a second, how on earth do system administrators protect user passwords? The users are always going to pick terrible passwords.
You protect them by using a cryptographic back-end defense mechanism called SALT.
And I want to pause right here and ask a clarifying question, because this trips up so many people learning security. If my password is password, and I know that is weak, so I change it to password with an exclamation point at the end, does adding that exclamation point count as adding SALT to my password?
No, absolutely not. That is a very dangerous and common misconception. Adding an exclamation point or swapping an A for an @ symbol is simply an example of user password complexity. It makes the password slightly harder for a basic unoptimized dictionary attack to guess, but it has absolutely nothing to do with cryptographic SALT. SALT is an automated mechanism implemented by the system administrator on the back-end architecture, and it is entirely invisible to the user.
How does the SALT mechanism actually work to stop these attacks?
When a user creates a new account and types in their terrible password, the server does not immediately hash it. First, the server's security protocol generates a long string of completely random data, maybe 32 characters of pure cryptographic gibberish. That random string is the SALT. The server automatically appends that random SALT to the end of the user's plaintext password, and then it hashes the combined string. It then stores both the unique resulting hash and the plaintext SALT in the database next to the user's name.
Wait, if the SALT is stored in plain text right next to the hash, the hacker can see it when they steal the database. Why does it matter?
Because it completely destroys the math behind the rainbow table. A rainbow table is pre-calculated based on the password alone. If an attacker's massive rainbow table contains the pre-calculated hash for the word password, it is completely useless to them now, because your system didn't hash the word password. Your system hashed the word password, plus a random string of gibberish. The resulting hash fingerprint is completely unique and will never appear in any generic rainbow table. To use a rainbow table against a salted database, the attacker would have to generate a brand new multi-terabyte rainbow table for every single unique SALT value in your database,
which would require more data storage space than exists on planet Earth. It renders pre-calculated tables mathematically worthless. It forces the attacker with a GPU rig to go back to square one and guess every password, combined with the SALT, one by one, dramatically slowing down the attack. And to test these defenses, the industry relies on a suite of standard tools. The curriculum mentions several that IT pros need to be familiar with. Hashcat is widely considered the fastest, most advanced GPU-accelerated password recovery tool in the world. John the Ripper is an absolute classic command line tool, renowned for its incredible flexibility and custom rule sets to mangle dictionary words.
And mastering these tools isn't just for malicious attackers. Penetration testers, security auditors, and proactive system administrators use tools like Hashcat and John the Ripper regularly to audit their own corporate networks. By safely extracting their own SAM file and running a cracking tool against it offline, an administrator can quickly identify which employees have chosen weak passwords that bypass the complexity filters and force them to reset them before a real attacker can exploit the vulnerability. It is proactive, applied defense.
Okay, let's take a breath and zoom out. We have covered a massive amount of technical ground today.
We really have. If there is one core takeaway from all of this deep dive into Chapter 12, it is that cryptography is a continuous, never-ending arms race. As our encryption algorithms get stronger and our key spaces expand to the size of galaxies, the computing power available to attackers grows, and the cleverness of their attack vectors evolves. Understanding this entire interlocking landscape is non-negotiable for an IT career. You have to understand the blazing operational speed of symmetric block ciphers like AES. You must understand how asymmetric algorithms like RSA and Diffy-Hellman establish the trust required to distribute those keys securely. You need to grasp how hashing ensures the absolute integrity of your data, how PKI manages digital identities at enterprise scale, and critically, how the human element of password management remains the softest target on the attack surface. This comprehensive systemic understanding is the foundation of any successful career in network defense and cybersecurity operations.
It's all connected. You can't secure the network if you don't secure the keys, and you can't secure the keys if you don't secure the humans. And it all circles back to where we started. That ordinary room with the 23 people. The greatest threats to our networks aren't always complex sci-fi hacking tools from a Hollywood movie. Sometimes, the most devastating corporate breaches are simply the result of the ruthless, elegant application of basic mathematical probability against human predictability. If we don't understand the underlying math, we simply cannot defend the network.
Precisely. You must know how the lock works to stop the lockpicker.
Thank you all so much for joining us on this extensive deep dive. Before you go, let me reiterate the ask. Please check the description below for links to resources that will help you dive even deeper into these cryptographic concepts. Like, subscribe, and share this session with your colleagues and classmates. If you are passionate about building a career in this field, I highly encourage you to review the channel for our other educational deep dives to help you continuously learn. Specifically, I highly recommend checking out my Digital Forensics podcast series and our Network and System Security podcast series, which perfectly complement the architectural defenses we discussed today. And make sure you are subscribed for next week's episode, where we will be tackling Chapter 13, Network Protection Systems, looking at the firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and honeypots that stand on the front lines of the network edge.
But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as you study this material. We spent a lot of time today talking about RSA, elliptic curve cryptography, and Diffy-Hellman. We noted that the absolute foundation of their security relies on the fact that standard computers simply cannot solve massive mathematical problems like factoring giant primes or computing discrete logarithms quickly. It would take them thousands of years. But the hardware landscape is shifting dramatically. What happens to global digital security, to our banking infrastructure, our secure communications, and our power grids on the day that functional large-scale quantum computers finally come online? Because a quantum computer running Shor's algorithm doesn't play by the rules of classical binary math. It uses quantum superposition to evaluate probability simultaneously. It is theoretically capable of solving those exact asymmetric math problems not in thousands of years, but in a matter of seconds. The asymmetric encryption that protects the entire world today will become mathematically obsolete overnight. How do we prepare our infrastructure for a post-quantum world?
That is a question that should keep every cybersecurity professional, architect, and student up at night. The math is always evolving. Master the attack, fortify the defense. Until next time, keep your hands on the keys and your network secure.